Number 1. Sergio Gómez. The night air in Michoacán carries a chill that seems to seep into the very soul of the music that defines this region. Imagine standing on a stage, the lights blinding you, thousands of voices screaming your name in a rhythmic chant that feels like a heartbeat. For Sergio Gómez, the lead singer of K-Paz de la Sierra, this wasn't just a dream, it was his reality. But in the shadows of the Mexican underworld, fame is a currency that often comes with a deadly tax. It was December 2007, and Sergio was at the absolute pinnacle of his career. His voice, a soulful blend of passion and traditional melody, had captured the hearts of millions across North America. But as he stepped off that stage for the final time, the atmosphere shifted from celebration to a silent, suffocating dread. Have you ever felt that sudden prickle on the back of your neck, the instinctive knowledge that you are being watched by eyes that hold no mercy? Sergio had been warned. The threats were whispered in phone calls and scrawled on notes, telling him not to perform in certain territories controlled by iron-fisted cartels. He chose to honor his fans instead. As we journey through these dark chapters of musical history, stories of talent extinguished by the brutal hand of organized crime, I invite you to join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss these deep dives into the shadows of the industry. The caravan of SUVs was making its way through the darkness when the nightmare began. Suddenly, the road was blocked. Armed men moved with a military precision that only comes from years of lawless combat surrounded the vehicles. They weren't looking for money or jewelry. They were looking for the voice of K-Paz. Sergio was pulled from the car, the screams of his companions fading into the distance as he was disappeared into the blackness of the Michoacán night, leaving behind a silence that would soon be filled with a horror no one was prepared for.
The hours that followed are a void of information, a terrifying gap in time where only Sergio and his captors know the true depth of the cruelty inflicted. When the sun began to rise over the rugged landscape, it revealed a scene that would haunt the music industry for decades. Sergio's body was discovered in a field, bearing the unmistakable marks of a cartel message. This wasn't just a murder. It was a ritual of intimidation. Investigators found evidence of extreme torture, including cigarette burns on his legs and signs of strangulation. The brutality suggested a personal vendetta or a direct challenge to the authority he represented through his fame. Why would a man who sang of love and life become the target of such visceral hatred? In the world of narcocultura, a singer's lyrics or even their presence in a rival's territory can be interpreted as an act of war. The authorities were left with more questions than answers, as the silence of the witnesses was louder than any testimony. The cartel members involved were ghosts, disappearing back into the mountain ranges they called home, leaving the family of Sergio Gómez to mourn a man whose only crime was sharing his gift with the world. The investigation went cold almost as quickly as it started, a common occurrence in a region where the line between the law and the lawless is often blurred by silver or lead. This tragedy marked the beginning of a dark era for musicians in Mexico, a time when the stage became a pedestal for a target. The fans were left to play his records on repeat, searching for clues in his melodies, wondering if he knew his time was running out. Every note he sang now felt like a premonition, a haunting echo of a life cut short by a power that recognized no borders and respected no art. As the morning for Sergio began, another shadow was already stretching across the horizon, moving toward a woman whose voice was as powerful as her spirit.
The legacy of Sergio Gómez remains a somber reminder that in the crosshairs of a cartel, even the brightest stars can be snuffed out in an instant. His funeral was a sea of white flowers and weeping fans, a collective outpouring of grief for a man who had become a symbol of the struggle between cultural beauty and systemic violence. But as the dirt settled on his casket, the machinery of the underworld continued to grind, fueled by a relentless desire for control over every aspect of public life, including the music that provides the soundtrack to the streets. The vacuum left by his absence was filled by fear, as other artists began to look over their shoulders, wondering if their next performance would be their last. The question remains, is any song worth a life? The cartels seem to think so, using these high-profile executions to broadcast their dominance to the world. They don't just want to kill a person, they want to kill an icon, to prove that no one, no matter how beloved, is untouchable. The story of Sergio is a foundational pillar in this grim gallery of lost voices, setting a precedent for the violence that would soon follow. It was a clear signal that the rules of engagement had changed and that the stage was no longer a sanctuary. As the industry tried to heal, the threats didn't stop. They evolved, becoming more sophisticated and more daring. The music didn't die, but it became heavy with the weight of the fallen. We are left to wonder what other masterpieces were lost in those dark hours in Michoacán, and how many more voices would be silenced before the world took notice. The echo of those 50 bullets and the smoke of the burning cigarettes are still felt in the hearts of those who loved him. Yet, even as we reflect on this tragedy, a different kind of storm was brewing further north, one that would involve a legendary diva, a series of chilling letters, and a flight into the unknown that would change the face of Latin music forever. Number 2. Jenni Rivera. When we talk about the queens of music, few wore the crown with as much grit and grace as the diva de la banda. Jenni Rivera was more than a singer. She was a force of nature, a woman who had survived domestic abuse and public scandal to become a beacon of hope for millions of women. But on the night of December 9th, 2012, that light was extinguished in a way that remains one of the most debated mysteries in the history of celebrity tragedies. It started as a triumphant night in Monterrey. Jenni had just performed a sold-out show, pouring her heart out to a crowd that hung on every word. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly in control. Yet beneath that confident exterior, there were whispers of a darkness closing in. For years, Jenni had lived under a cloud of death threats, many of them originating from the shadowy figures who controlled the very regions she toured. Some say she had been warned directly by high-ranking cartel members to stay away from certain venues, while others claim she was being pressured to launder money through her massive business empire. Have you ever wondered if a person can sense their own end approaching?
In her final press conference, she spoke with a haunting sense of finality, stating that she felt so blessed and so happy, as if she were making peace with the universe. After the show, she boarded a private Learjet headed for Toluca. The plane took off into the crisp night air, carrying Jenni and her closest associates. Minutes later, the aircraft vanished from radar. It didn't just crash, it disintegrated, falling from the sky at a near vertical angle. The wreckage was scattered across a remote mountainous area, a scene of such total devastation that it looked less like an accident and more like a targeted strike.
The official investigation concluded that the crash was a result of mechanical failure and pilot error, citing the age of the plane and the fatigue of the crew. But for those who knew the world Jenni navigated, that explanation felt far too convenient. In the wake of her death, stories began to surface that painted a much more sinister picture. Rumors swirled that a bomb had been planted on the aircraft, a parting gift from a cartel boss who felt slighted or defied. There were reports of a specific kingpin who had claimed responsibility for the accident in private circles, viewing Jenni as a liability or a symbol of resistance that needed to be removed. Why would a successful artist be targeted in such a high-stakes manner? In the volatile landscape of the Mexican drug war, musicians are often seen as cultural assets. If they cannot be controlled, they are sometimes eliminated to prevent them from becoming symbols of a different kind of power. The sheer violence of the plane's descent, dropping nearly 30,000 feet in seconds, suggested to many that something catastrophic had happened on board. Was it truly a faulty stabilizer, or was it a message sent to anyone else who thought they could operate outside the cartel's influence? The lack of a black box recorder only fueled the fires of conspiracy. Jenni's family was left to pick up the pieces of a broken legacy, fighting for answers in a system that often prizes silence over the truth. The diva was gone, but the questions surrounding her final flight refused to stay buried in the mountains of Nuevo León. Each year on the anniversary of the crash, the same theories resurface, driven by the belief that a woman as strong as Jenni Rivera wouldn't have been taken down by mere technicalities. The impact of Jenni's death sent shockwaves through the Latin music world that are still felt today. She wasn't just a singer. She was a business mogul, a mother, and a symbol of Mexican-American identity. The loss of her voice left a void that no one has been able to truly fill. As the public mourned, investigators combed through her life, looking for the connections that might have led to such a tragic end. They found a woman who was constantly looking over her shoulder, a woman who had built a wall of security around her family, but knew that even the thickest walls could be breached by those with enough reach. Her death highlighted the extreme risks faced by performers who refused to bow to the demands of organized crime. It served as a grim reminder that fame does not offer a shield against the reality of the streets. Sometimes it only makes the target larger. Jenni lived her life out loud, and in the end, her death was just as loud, a tragedy that played out on a global stage. To this day, fans visit the crash site, leaving behind crosses and flowers, searching for some sense of closure that the official reports failed to provide. Was she a victim of fate, or a victim of a war she never asked to join? The truth may be locked away in the classified files of agencies that prefer to keep the peace rather than seek justice. As we close the chapter on the Diva de la Banda, we are forced to confront the terrifying reality that in this industry, the higher you fly, the further there is to fall. But while Jenni's tragedy was sky-high and spectacular, the next story takes us back to the dusty roads of Tamaulipas, where a golden voice was silenced by a hail of lead that would leave a legend riddled with holes.
Would you like me to proceed with case number 3?
Number 3, Valentín Elizalde. Known affectionately to his millions of fans as El Gallo de Oro, the Golden Rooster, Valentín was a man whose charisma was as unmistakable as his signature cowboy hat. His voice wasn't technically perfect, but it possessed a raw, gravelly honesty that resonated with the soul of the working class. However, in the high-stakes world of narcocorridos, a song is never just a song. It is a statement of territory, loyalty, and sometimes a lethal provocation. On the night of November 25, 2006, Valentín took the stage at the Expo Feria in Reynosa, Tamaulipas. Reynosa was and remains a volatile stronghold, a place where the air is heavy with the unspoken rules of the local syndicates. Despite the tension, Valentín opened his set with a controversial hit, a song that many believed was a direct insult to the Gulf Cartel. Friends and advisors had pleaded with him to change his setlist, to play it safe in a city that didn't belong to his usual patrons. But Valentín was a man of pride. He sang with a defiance that electrified the crowd, unaware that in the darkness beyond the stage lights, a death warrant was being signed in real time. Have you ever wondered if courage is sometimes just another word for a tragic lack of fear? As he finished his performance and climbed into his black Suburban, the atmosphere didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a trap. He was only a few hundred yards from the venue when the silence of the night was shattered by the rhythmic thunder of automatic weapons. In an instant, the vehicle was transformed into a metal sieve. The scene that greeted the first responders was nothing short of a massacre. Over 70 shell casings from AK-47s and AR-15s littered the pavement, glowing under the streetlights like copper teeth. Inside the vehicle, the Golden Rooster lay slumped, his body riddled with over 20 bullet wounds. His manager and his driver were also killed in the onslaught, leaving only his cousin, Tano, as a wounded survivor of the carnage. The brutality was a calculated message, a signature of the Los Zetas, who at the time served as the enforcement arm of the regional cartel. They didn't just want Valentín dead. They wanted to humiliate his memory and terrify anyone else who dared to sing lyrics that favored their rivals, particularly the Sinaloa cartel. The investigation revealed a chilling level of premeditation. The hitmen hadn't just waited for him. They had moved with a clinical efficiency that suggested they knew his every move. Rumors began to circulate that the execution was ordered by a high-ranking boss who felt personally disrespected by Valentín's lyrics. This was the moment the music world realized that the narco ballads were no longer just stories. They were the front lines of a literal war. Why would a singer risk everything for a 3-minute track? To Valentín, it was about authenticity. But to the men with the guns, it was a breach of contract written in blood. The images of his bullet-ridden SUV went viral, becoming a gruesome landmark in the history of the Mexican drug war. It was a visual testament to the fact that no amount of fame could provide armor against a coordinated cartel hit.
The death of the Golden Rooster sent a shockwave through Mexico that changed the music industry forever. Thousands of people lined the streets for his funeral procession, many singing his songs through tears, creating a haunting chorus that echoed through the town of Hitonhueca. He was buried with his father, another legendary singer, in a tomb that has since become a shrine for those who see him as a martyr of the genre. But his death also ushered in an era of intense paranoia. Musicians began to hire private security details that rivaled those of heads of state. Entire bands started refusing to play in certain states, effectively creating no-go zones for entertainment. The mystery of who pulled the trigger was eventually tied to a man known as El Hummer, a founding member of the Zetas. But justice in these cases is often a shadow that disappears when you try to touch it. Even today, if you play Valentin's music in certain parts of Tamaulipas, the tension in the room becomes palpable. His life was a testament to the power of the voice, and his death was a testament to the fragility of life in the shadow of the cartels. He died at the age of 27, joining a tragic club of artists whose potential was cut short by violence. As the sun set on the era of the Golden Rooster, the violence didn't dissipate. It simply moved to the next highway, waiting for the next singer who thought his fame made him invincible. Just a few years later, on a lonely stretch of road in Sinaloa, another man known as El Shaka would find out that even 30 bullets aren't enough to satisfy a cartel's thirst for revenge. Would you like me to proceed with case number 4?
Number 4. Sergio Vega. Known to the world as El Shaka, Sergio Vega was a titan of the banda genre, a man whose rugged charm and soulful ballads made him a household name across the northern plains of Mexico. His nickname, a tribute to a legendary Zulu warrior, suggested a man who was built for battle, but his weapon was a microphone, not a blade. By June 2010, the atmosphere in Sinaloa had become a toxic fog of suspicion and sudden violence. Rumors of Vega's death had actually begun to circulate online hours before the tragedy occurred, a chilling digital omen that the singer himself tried to debunk. Just moments before his final journey, Sergio spoke to the press, laughing off the reports of his demise and stating that he had increased his security because of the difficult times everyone was facing. How does it feel to look into a camera and insist you are alive while your executioners are already checking their watches? He was driving his red Cadillac toward a concert in Alway when the reality of those difficult times caught up with him. On a desolate stretch of the Mexico 15 highway, a vehicle pulled alongside his. This wasn't a random act of road rage, it was a tactical interception. A hail of gunfire shattered the windows of the Cadillac, wounding Sergio and forcing the car to a halt. The attackers didn't speed away. They stopped, stepped out of their vehicle, and approached the man who had just told the world he was safe. The final moments of Sergio Vega's life were a grim departure from the glamour of the stage. As he lay wounded in the driver's seat, the gunman showed a level of cold-blooded determination that defines the cartel's brand of justice. They didn't just want him dead, they wanted to ensure there was no possibility of a miracle. They fired again at point-blank range, aiming specifically at his head and chest. Over 30 shell casings were recovered from the scene, a signature of the overkill method used by Los Zetas and rival factions to signal their total dominance over the victim. The red Cadillac, once a symbol of his success and flamboyant lifestyle, became a metal coffin on the side of a dusty highway. Investigators were met with a wall of silence. In the heart of Sinaloa, people know that seeing too much is a death sentence itself. Why was El Shaka targeted? Some investigators pointed towards his refusal to pay protection money, while others suggested he had performed at a party for the wrong people. In this world, neutrality is often mistaken for betrayal. The sheer brazenness of the attack, taking place on a major highway in broad daylight, was a message to the entire music industry. No matter how famous you are, no matter how many fans love you, you are never out of reach. The man who had spent his life singing about the bravado of others found himself at the mercy of men who possessed none. The news of Sergio Vega's execution sent a wave of genuine terror through the musical community. If El Shaka, with all his resources and connections, could be taken down so easily, who was truly safe? His funeral was a massive event, an outpouring of grief that brought the city of Esperanza to a standstill. As his body was laid to rest, the red Cadillac was towed away, a mangled wreck that served as a grisly monument to the dangers of the genre. The investigation, as many expected, failed to produce any high-ranking arrests, leaving the motives buried in the shifting sands of cartel politics. The tragedy of Sergio Vega highlighted the celebrity tax of the drug war. The higher your profile, the more valuable you are as a target for those looking to make a statement. His music continues to play in the cantinas and on the radio, but there is a bitterness to the melodies now, a reminder of the price paid for fame in a land where the law is written in lead. As the dust settled on the highway in Sinaloa, the violence continued its relentless march, seeking out the next artist who dared to walk the line between the stage and the street. Only a year later, the focus would shift to a singer who embodied the very commander persona that the cartels both emulated and envied, leading to a confrontation that would end in a shower of sparks and blood. Would you like me to proceed with case number 5?
Number 5. Diego Rivas. In the world of narcocorridos, Diego Rivas was a rising star who captured the essence of the Culiacán street life. Known to his fans as a singer who didn't just perform the lifestyle, but lived within its very heart. Rivas was celebrated for his gritty, authentic storytelling. His music was the heartbeat of the plazas, a rhythmic chronicle of power, loyalty, and the dangerous allure of the underworld. But on November 14th, 2011, the reality of the lyrics he sang came crashing down in a hail of gunfire that left the city of Culiacán paralyzed with fear. Diego was gathered with friends and fellow musicians at a private residence, a place that should have been a sanctuary. In the capital of Sinaloa, the lines between social gatherings and tactical targets are often non-existent. As the group enjoyed the evening, the air was suddenly pierced by the screech of tires and the heavy thud of boots on pavement. A professional commando unit, armed with high-caliber rifles, stormed the location with a singular, violent purpose. There was no conversation, no list of demands, and no chance for negotiation. The attackers opened fire with a ferocity that turned a casual get-together into a localized war zone. Have you ever considered how quickly a life built on words can be ended by a single pull of a trigger? Diego Rivas, the man who gave a voice to the shadows, was about to become a permanent part of the silence he so often sang about.
The aftermath of the assault was a scene of absolute carnage. Diego Rivas was found among the fallen, his body struck multiple times by the heavy rounds favored by cartel hitmen. 2 other individuals were killed in the crossfire, and several more were left clinging to life, victims of a conflict they likely never saw coming. The investigation into the murder revealed the hallmark signs of a professional execution. The killers didn't just fire randomly.
They targeted Rivas with a precision that suggested he was the primary objective of the raid. In Culiacán, the rumor mill is often more accurate than the official police reports, and the word on the street was that Diego had crossed a line that no amount of talent could erase. Some suggested he had performed for the wrong faction, while others believed his lyrics had become too specific, revealing secrets that were meant to remain in the dark. Why would a singer risk his life to tell the stories of men who value silence above all else? For Rivas, it was about the art of the corrido, but for the cartels, it was a breach of security. The loss of Diego Rivas was a significant blow to the local music scene, as he was seen as one of the few who could bridge the gap between traditional banda and the modern, harder-edged sound of the streets. The authorities, hampered by the pervasive culture of fear and the influence of the cartels, made little progress in identifying the specific gunman, leaving the case to join the mountain of unsolved tragedies in Sinaloa.
The funeral for Diego Rivas was a somber, high-stakes affair. Hundreds of people gathered to pay their respects, but the atmosphere was thick with tension, as if the gunmen themselves might be watching from the periphery. His death served as a stark warning to the new generation of narcocorrido singers. The closer you get to the flame, the more likely you are to be consumed by it. Diego's music didn't stop playing. If anything, his death turned him into a legend, his songs now carrying the weight of a life lost to the very themes he popularized. But for his family and the community, the cost of that legend was far too high. The execution of El Commander, as some referred to his persona, highlighted the impossible position of artists in a region where the cartels act as both patrons and executioners. As his voice faded from the airwaves and moved into the digital archives of history, the cycle of violence in Mexico showed no signs of slowing down. The stage remained lit, but the shadows behind the curtain were growing longer and more predatory. While Diego's story ended in a shower of lead in a private home, the next tragedy would strike in a much more public setting, proving that even a crowded commercial plaza offers no protection when a debt of honor is being collected. We move now to the bright lights of Tecate, where an accordionist's final notes would be drowned out by the sounds of a holiday horror. Would you like me to proceed with case number 6?
Number 6. Gabino, Ayala. The festive spirit of Christmas Day usually brings a sense of peace and reflection, but in the border town of Tecate, the holiday of 2020 was shattered by a brutal display of organized crime. Gabino Ayala, the talented accordionist for the group Máximo Impacto, was a man whose fingers danced across the keys to create the high-energy soundtrack of the Baja California music scene. His band was known for their catchy rhythms and lyrics that often touched upon the realities of life in a region where the sun sets over a land divided by walls and secret tunnels. On that fateful Wednesday, Gabino was at a busy commercial plaza, a place filled with families and shoppers enjoying the holiday atmosphere. There is something particularly chilling about violence that erupts in a space meant for community and joy. Without warning, a group of armed individuals approached his vehicle. The air, which had been filled with the sounds of distant laughter and holiday music, was suddenly torn apart by the rhythmic clatter of gunfire. Gabino was not alone. He was accompanied by his wife and another family member, both of whom were caught in the crossfire of a vendetta they likely had no part in. Have you ever considered how a single moment of targeted rage can ripple outward, destroying innocent lives in its wake? Within seconds, the commercial plaza was transformed from a place of commerce into a crime scene, and the man who provided the heartbeat for Máximo Impacto was silenced forever.
The investigation into the attack at the El Grand Prix Plaza revealed a level of coldness that shocked even the hardened residents of Tecate. Gabino Ayala was struck multiple times at close range, a clear indication that this was a professional hit intended to ensure he would never play another note. His wife and the third victim also succumbed to their injuries, making this a triple homicide that underscored the cartel's lack of boundaries when it comes to collateral damage. In the world of Mexican organized crime, an artist's association with certain figures or their presence in specific neighborhoods can be enough to trigger a death sentence. For Gabino, the motive was rumored to be linked to narcocultos, or songs that allegedly favored one faction over another in the shifting alliances of the Baja California cartels. Why would a musician be held responsible for the actions of the people he sings about? To the criminal syndicates, the messenger is often just as guilty as the subject of the message. The gunman fled the scene in a vehicle that was later found abandoned and set ablaze, a classic tactic used to destroy forensic evidence and leave the authorities chasing ghosts. The loss of Gabino was a devastating blow to the grupero music community, which had already seen too many of its stars fall to the violence of the drug war. The empty chair on the stage where he once sat with his accordion became a silent monument to a talent extinguished by a culture that values power over life. As the community of Tecate mourned the loss of a local hero, the music of Maximo Impacto took on a somber, almost ghostly quality. Fans gathered to play his recordings, the bright sound of his accordion now serving as a painful reminder of the blood spilled on a day meant for peace. The tragedy of Gabino Ayala highlighted a terrifying reality for performers in the border regions. No public space is truly safe, and no holiday is sacred when a debt is being collected. His death was a message intended to resonate far beyond the plaza, a warning to other musicians to watch their step and their lyrics in a territory where the walls have ears and the streets have memories. The authorities struggled to make any headway in the case, as witnesses were too terrified to speak, and the perpetrators were shielded by the very organizations they served. Gabino's legacy is now tied to the grim statistics of a war that has claimed thousands of lives, proving that even those who only provide the soundtrack to the conflict are not immune to its deadly consequences. As we reflect on the silence left behind by the accordionist of Tecate, we must prepare ourselves for an even more disturbing tale, one that moves from the bright lights of a commercial plaza to the clinical, sterile halls of a hospital, where a wounded singer found that even the presence of doctors could not protect her from a killer's obsession. Would you like me to proceed with case number 7?
Number 7. Zayda Peña. In the mid-2000s, Zayda was a rising star in the grupero scene, the lead singer of the band Zayda y los Culpables. Her music often touched on the complexities of love and betrayal, but no one could have predicted that her own life would end in a sequence of events so cinematic and cruel that it felt ripped from a horror script. The tragedy began on the night of November 30th, 2007, at a motel in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, a city where the shadow of the Gulf Cartel looms over every corner.
Zayda was staying at the Marlin Motel when gunmen stormed her room, opening fire with a cold, clinical precision. Her friend and the motel manager were killed instantly, caught in a spray of lead that seemed intended to leave no witnesses. Zayda, however, survived the initial onslaught, though she was critically wounded with a bullet to the neck. She was rushed to the Alfredo Pumarejo Hospital, where doctors fought desperately to stabilize her. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of a medical facility, one usually expects safety, a sanctuary from the violence of the streets. But in the world of the cartels, a failed execution is merely a task left unfinished. Have you ever felt the sheer, paralyzing terror of knowing that the walls meant to protect you are actually closing in? As Zayda lay in her hospital bed, clinging to life after a successful surgery, the darkness of Matamoros was preparing to enter the ward.
In the early hours of the following morning, the unthinkable happened. Despite the presence of hospital security, a lone gunman managed to infiltrate the intensive care unit. He didn't come to steal or to threaten. He came to ensure that Zayda Peña would never sing another note. The intruder walked directly to her bed and, with a terrifying lack of hesitation, fired several rounds into the wounded singer's chest and head. This was the ultimate violation of a sacred space, a message that nowhere, not even a place of healing, was beyond the reach of the cartels. The motive behind the hit has been the subject of dark speculation for nearly 2 decades. While some point toward a crime of passion involving a lover with cartel ties, others believe she had become an accidental witness to a high-level meeting she was never supposed to see. In the borderlands, information is often more dangerous than a weapon. The hospital execution sent a chill through the entire country, forcing the public to realize that the rules of engagement had vanished. Why would someone go to such extreme lengths to finish off a woman who was already incapacitated? The answer lies in the cartel's obsession with finality, the need to prove that their will is absolute and their targets have no hope of escape. The gunman vanished into the night, leaving behind a blood-stained hospital room and a legacy of fear that would haunt the medical community of Tamaulipas for years to come. The death of Zayda Peña at the age of 28 marked a turning point in the psychological warfare of the Mexican drug war. It stripped away the last remaining illusions of safety for public figures. Her funeral was a quiet, tense affair, as the community grappled with the realization that even the most basic human protections had been discarded. Zayda's music, once filled with the hopeful pangs of romance, now serves as a haunting epitaph for a woman who was hunted until her last breath. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved, buried under layers of institutional silence and the pervasive fear of retaliation. The tragedy of the hospital hit became a dark legend, a story whispered by other musicians as a warning of what happens when the underworld decides your time is up. As we move away from the clinical horror of Matamoros, we travel toward a mass tragedy that would see an entire ensemble vanish into the earth, proving that sometimes the cartels don't just target a star, they target the entire stage. In a desolate area known as Mina, a group called Kombo, Kolombia would soon walk into a trap that would lead to one of the most gruesome massacres in musical history. Would you like me to proceed with case number 8?
Number 8. Kombo, Kolombia. While many stories in the annals of true crime focus on the Lone Star, the tragedy of Kombo, Kolombia is a haunting tale of collective loss that redefined the scale of cartel brutality. This wasn't the execution of a single singer. It was the systematic erasure of an entire musical brotherhood. Kombo, Kolombia was a popular vallenato-style group, known for their infectious energy and their ability to keep a dance floor moving until the early hours of the morning. In January 2013, they were hired for a private gig at a ranch called Potrero de los Tricados in the municipality of Hidalgo, Nuevo León. For a working band, a private booking often seems like an easy payday, a chance to play in a more intimate setting. But as the musicians set up their equipment, the air began to grow heavy with a sense of impending doom. They were not there to perform for fans. They had been lured into a meticulously planned death trap. During the middle of their performance, the music was abruptly cut short by the arrival of multiple vehicles filled with armed men. These weren't just common criminals. They were members of the Los Zetas, one of the most ruthless paramilitary cartels in history. Have you ever pondered the sheer terror of 17 people realizing simultaneously that their instruments would be the last things they ever touched? The band members and their crew were rounded up at gunpoint, their hands bound, and forced into the very vehicles that would carry them to their final destination.
What followed was a journey into the heart of darkness. The group was driven to a remote, abandoned ranch in the town of Mina, a desolate area where the silence is only broken by the wind. One by one, the musicians were taken to the edge of a deep, narrow well. The interrogations were brutal and brutal. The captors demanded to know if the band had performed for rival cartels or if they had any information on their enemies. In the warped logic of the Zetas, playing music for a rival was a capital offense. Despite their pleas of being mere entertainers with no political ties, the order was given. The members of Kombo, Kolombia were executed, and their bodies were unceremoniously dumped into the hole. Out of the 18 people captured, only one managed to escape the darkness. This lone survivor, whose identity remains protected for obvious reasons, managed to crawl out of the pit and wander through the desert for hours until he found help. His testimony led investigators to the site, where a gruesome recovery operation began. For days, forensic teams worked to pull 17 bodies from the depths of the earth, a task that horrified even the most seasoned investigators. Why would a cartel feel the need to wipe out an entire band? To the Zetas, it was a display of absolute territorial control, a way to show that even the songs in the air belonged to them.
The massacre of Kombo, Kolombia remains a permanent scar on the soul of the Mexican music industry. It was a mass execution that proved the cartels had moved beyond targeted hits and into the realm of domestic terrorism. The group's small blue bus, found abandoned at the original ranch, became a symbol of the lives that were simply vacuumed out of existence. Funerals were held across the region, a somber procession of caskets that represented a generation of talent and joy lost to the abyss. The incident led to a massive crackdown in Nuevo León, but for the families of the 17 victims, justice was a cold comfort. The music of Kombo, Kolombia can still be heard in the streets, but the upbeat rhythms are now haunted by the knowledge of how they ended. It forced a terrifying question upon every working musician in Mexico. Who are you really playing for? The line between a guest and a target had been completely erased. As the world reeled from the scale of the Mina massacre, the cycle of violence continued its relentless churn, eventually finding its way to the city of Guadalajara. There, another artist would find that his success in the traditional banda scene made him a high-value target for a quick and clinical elimination. We turn now to the story of Enrique Ruiz, a man whose life was ended in a flash of light in the very city he called home. Would you like me to proceed with case number 9?
Number 9. Ernesto Ruiz. In the vibrant, bustling streets of Guadalajara, the Banda Cuisillos reigned supreme as one of the most respected institutions in regional Mexican music. Ernesto Ruiz, one of the group's lead vocalists, was the personification of that success, a man whose voice carried the weight of tradition and the excitement of a new era. Known for their unique Native American-inspired costumes and high-energy performances, the band was a staple of the cultural fabric. But on October 12, 2017, that cultural fabric was stained with blood, in a manner that was as sudden as it was shocking. It was a typical Thursday afternoon in the Independencia neighborhood. Ernesto was at his home, a place that should have been his ultimate fortress of solitude. In a city like Guadalajara, the pearl of the West, there is a thin, invisible veil between the sophisticated urban life and the raw power of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Without warning, that veil was shredded. At least 3 armed men arrived at his residence, moving with a chilling sense of purpose. They didn't come to rob the house or make a scene. They came for Ernesto. Have you ever considered how a man who spends his life performing for thousands can be so vulnerable in the quiet of his own garage? Before he could even react, the silence of the residential street was punctured by the sharp, metallic cracks of point-blank gunfire. The details of the assault suggested a level of intimacy and coldness that pointed directly to a targeted execution. Ernesto was shot in the head and upper body at extremely close range, leaving him no chance of survival. The initial reports from the authorities attempted to frame the incident as a botched robbery, a common tactic used to downplay the influence of organized crime in the city. However, the precision of the hit and the fact that nothing of significant value was taken told a much different story. Why would a beloved singer with no known criminal ties be hunted down in his own driveway? In the complex hierarchy of the Mexican music scene, even being too successful can be a motive if it draws the wrong kind of attention or if the artist refuses to be a mouthpiece for a specific faction. The execution of Ernesto Ruiz was a message delivered to the heart of Guadalajara. No one, regardless of their status or the love of their fans, is beyond the reach of those who hold the real power in the shadows. The gunman escaped in a white vehicle, disappearing into the city's traffic like drops of water in the ocean, leaving the Banda Cuisillos to face a future without one of its most vital voices. The investigation soon became a familiar carousel of red tape and silence, as those who might have known the truth were far too afraid to speak it.
The mourning for Ernesto Ruiz was an intense, citywide event. Fans gathered outside his home, turning the sight of his murder into a shrine of candles and photographs. His bandmates, dressed in their iconic regalia, stood in somber silence, their music replaced by the heavy sound of sobbing. The death of Ernesto served as a grim reminder that the safe cities of Mexico were no longer a refuge for the stars. It highlighted the terrifying reality that the cartels were no longer just operating in the dusty border towns or the rugged mountains of Sinaloa. They were now comfortable conducting high-profile assassinations in the heart of the country's major metropolises. As his voice was laid to rest, the industry once again retreated into a state of high alert, with many wondering who would be the next to pay the price for a fame they worked so hard to achieve. The tragedy of the Banda Cuisillo singer was a prelude to a new level of brazen violence that would soon claim an even younger victim. As we leave the mourning streets of Guadalajara, we move toward the coastal air of Guaymas, where a rising star's journey would end in a storm of 50 bullets, a violent crescendo that would mark one of the most aggressive hits in the history of the genre. Would you like me to proceed with case number 10?
Number 10. Francisco Fourcade. In the high-octane world of the new generation of narco-corrido singers, Francisco Fourcade was a name that carried the weight of both immense talent and extreme risk. At just 24 years old, he had already built a reputation for lyrics that didn't just hint at the underworld, but seemed to inhabit its very core. He lived fast, sang hard, and moved through the state of Sonora with a confidence that some called bravado and others called a death wish. By early 2019, the city of Guaymas had become a flashpoint for rival cartel factions, a place where loyalty is as thin as the coastal fog. Francisco had already survived one attempt on his life, a narrow escape that should have been a final warning. But for a young man fueled by fame and the adrenaline of the genre, the stage was a siren song he couldn't ignore. Have you ever wondered if some people are born with the knowledge that their time is short, leading them to burn twice as bright and twice as fast? On the evening of February 4, 2019, that fire was violently extinguished. As he traveled through the streets of Guaymas in a blue vehicle, he was intercepted by a commando unit that moved with the terrifying coordination of a professional hit squad. There was no chase, no exchange of words, and no mercy. The attackers unleashed a barrage of lead so intense that it felt like the very air was being torn apart by the sound of 50 separate explosions.
The aftermath of the ambush was a scene of total destruction that left the local community in a state of shock. Francisco Fourcade's body was found not in the car, but several yards away, suggesting he had made a desperate final break for his life before being cut down. The sheer volume of fire, over 50 rounds from high-caliber rifles, transformed the scene into a grisly testament to the cartel's hatred. This wasn't a warning. It was an erasure. The investigation quickly revealed that this was a coordinated strike involving multiple shooters, a hit that required significant resources and intelligence. In the days following his death, the digital world was flooded with videos of his last performances, creating a haunting contrast between the vibrant young man on stage and the tragic figure found on the pavement of Sonora. Why would such a massive amount of force be used against a single singer? In the tactical world of the cartels, overkill is a language used to tell rivals that their associates are never safe and that no amount of protection can stop a determined assassin. Francisco had been the subject of numerous narco messages on social media in the months leading up to his execution, digital threats that became a physical reality in a storm of copper and gunpowder. His death marked the end of a promising career and the beginning of a new, even more violent chapter for musicians in northern Mexico.
The execution of Francisco Fourcade serves as a final, bloody punctuation mark in our exploration of the deadly intersection between music and organized crime. His funeral was a spectacle of grief and defiance, attended by thousands who saw him as a voice of a generation trapped in a cycle of violence they didn't create but couldn't escape. As the dirt was shoveled onto his casket, the reality of the situation became undeniably clear. The stage in Mexico has become one of the most dangerous places on earth. From the legendary diva de la banda to the rising stars like Fourcade, the cost of fame in the shadow of the cartels is often measured in lives rather than records sold. These 10 cases are not just isolated incidents. They are part of a larger systemic tragedy where art is held hostage by the whims of warlords. We are left with the haunting melodies and the unanswered questions of families who still wait for a justice that may never come. As the sun sets over the rugged landscapes of Sinaloa and Michoacán, the music continues to play, but it is a music forever altered by the ghosts of those who were silenced. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness within the music industry. The stories of these artists remind us that behind every song there is a human life, and in this world, that life can be taken in the blink of an eye.